Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Optimistic Future podcast. I am your host, Bryan Rade, and today's episode is going to be a little bit of a different format than past episodes. And by different format, I mean a bit of a different approach than previous episodes. Um, in previous episodes, the main approach that I take with the Optimistic Future podcast is looking at what I would kind of generally refer to as bottom up more of a bottom-up approach, more bottom-up topics. And by that I mean that, in past episodes, we've talked about some of the little steps that we can all take in our day-to-day lives to collectively make a big difference. So things like, not mowing your lawn until the month of June to help create more opportunity for pollinators to have habitats before we, mow down their habitats, or trying to take steps to reduce the likelihood that we're going to inadvertently let trash get into the environment and then blow into our waterways and oceans and contribute to the huge amount of garbage that's in our oceans, or the benefits of supporting small-scale local farmers for our overall, food sovereignty, food security, food diversity options, things like that. So these are all, in my opinion, very important steps that we can all take and collectively have a huge difference. But I look at those as being I would categorize them as being more bottom up, meaning that in a sense they're kind of reactionary to issues or challenges that we already have in the world around us. So, there's already too much garbage in the ocean. So let's take steps to have less garbage getting into the oceans. There are already challenges related to like environmental and health impacts from, mass agriculture and the food waste that is just kind of seemingly an irreconcilable inherent issue with, say big grocery stores and things like that. Whereas when we're buying from small scale farmers, there's going to be less food waste and there's, more of a kind of closed loop agricultural elements to that. One of the interviews that I had around the harms of different chemicals that we put into the environment. A simple step of like just don't use air fresheners, don't use perfume, don't use natural artificially scented products. That'll help to reduce the chemical overload in our environment around us. These are all again really important steps, but they're more reactionary to underlying problems that are already there. Now, don't get me wrong, if a magic wand was waved and suddenly we had no pollution in our environment around us, I would still say don't use those, artificially scented products because let's not add more chemicals into the mix, even if we didn't already have an underlying issue with that. But a lot of these really all of the topics that I've discussed on previous episodes with different experts in different areas, they're kind of reactionary, if you will, to underlying problems that are already there. So again, can't emphasize enough that I think it's very important to be aware of these issues and to take steps to try to push back against those underlying issues or help to rectify them in the long run. But today's episode, the reason I say that it's different is I consider the topic today to be more of a top-down approach. So looking at things more from a kind of more of a bird's eye view to say, okay, well, yeah, we want to damage control um, with respect to the underlying issues that are already there in the world around us. But how can we look at taking more of a preemptive or sort of a prophylactic approach to help try to mitigate issues down the road, and maybe tied in with that, look at things even more kind of upstream than more of that kind of more like bottom up approach, a more reactionary approach that I've been mentioning a few times now. So what I mean by that is I've been doing over the years, for a few years now, anyways. Maybe more than a few years. I'm getting progressively older as I'm getting into, working my way through middle age, realizing how fast time goes. So maybe it's been 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I'm not really sure. Losing track of time. But for quite a while now, I have been thinking about things on more of a kind of more of a global level. Kind of ultimately asking the question of what can be done, like what can be done to help shape our societies, our environment, kind of the economic well-being of people, to really have like the most optimistic future possible, the most ideal future possible, like ideal circumstances for the good and well-being of all people around the world. And at the end of the day, again, while I feel that, these little steps of that we can all take, easy steps in our day-to-day lives, like, reducing chemical exposure and not mowing your lawn till June and buying from local farmers and things like that, well, very, very helpful. Um, what can be looked at more on sort of a deeper level, more of a root cause level to help prevent future problems from occurring and maybe stem the underlying, stem some of these underlying issues from more of like the top down. So for example, yes, reducing our day-to-day utilization of chemicals is, I think, a really good thing to do. But then, elephant in the room is that there are large companies, corporations that are spraying lots of chemicals on, say, I don't know, on golf courses, for example, or they're putting different chemicals into the environment when they're, producing certain things in mass scales. A lot of folks buy a lot of products from countries that have not the most strict environmental policies. And so it's like, oh, we have maybe where I'm based out of Canada. So, we have certain rules and regulations around our companies here for what they're allowed to, put into the environment. But then if someone says, well, I'm going to buy a product that's made in another country where they don't have those strict environmental policies, then, even if you're living in a country where they have strict environmental policies, if you're buying products from a place where they don't have those, you're still ultimately, contributing to the, say, pollution epidemic, if you will. So looking to see like, well, if they're, say, using the pollution example of, well, okay, if we had sort of a sort of an intrinsic or it's the word I'm looking for. If we had sort of a fundamental shift in consciousness around like or conscientiousness, maybe both consciousness and conscientiousness. If we had a shift in both of those, where it's like, oh, I'm not going to support companies that manufacture goods in places where they don't have really strict environmental policies, or maybe taking it a step, maybe taking another approach and say like, do I really need this thing? Do I really need to buy those, that throwaway, piece of clothing, or do I really need to buy that like extra lawn ornament for my garden that's, made from plastic that, was now there's a bunch of microplastics in the environment because now I have that extra pink flamingo or that extra garden gnome. Nothing against garden gnomes. They're very cute. And I'm sure there's like somebody listening like, I make my garden gnomes out of the most like sustainable, ethically sourced, pottery clay on the planet. So, anyways, not trying to throw garden gnomes under the bus, but anyways, if we kind of shift our fundamental thinking around, like, oh, do I really need that thing, or when I buy this thing, what kind of impact is it going to have? If there was a shift around that, well, then that would lead to a shift in the market where it's like, oh, I'm just going to throw the pink flamingos under the bus here. I'm sure that there'll be some complaints about that too. But anyways, if we take pink flamingos, for example, if suddenly it's like, oh, there's no longer a demand for plastic pink flamingos to be put in people's gardens, then suddenly it's like, wow, like how many tons of pollution does that reduce in the world at large? How much oil is saved? Because of course, plastic being a byproduct of oil, how much of that would be saved, over the course of time, where it's like, the average person probably thinking like, oh, like I just want my garden to be spruced up and a little more jazzy. I want to put a pink flamingo in there, and not really thinking about the downstream effects. But without that sort of mindset shift around like, oh, I buy this thing, or I have this, practice in my day-to-day life. Like I just always run the tap, as long as I'm brushing my teeth for 2 minutes. Like, what's the big deal? I've done that since I was a kid. I don't know if everybody stopped running their tap while they're brushing their teeth, how much water would we save? How much energy would be saved by, the water treatment plants not needing to process, quite as many, millions of liters or gallons of, water every day or whatnot. So, uh, this episode is not about, specifically about pollution mitigation or pink flamingos or garden gnomes or not, running the tap while brushing teeth, but just as examples of, those would be examples of more like upstream or top down shifts that could take place that would ultimately have, in my opinion, a positive net impact on different things that shape our optimal future moving forward. In this case, not wasting as much water is good for the environment, not as much microplastics getting into the environment from those darn pink flamingos. I'm going to change the name of the podcast to the Anti-Pink Flamingo podcast. Just kidding. So this is what I'm referring to in terms of, more of a top-down approach as opposed to more of a bottom-up approach. So not to say that the podcast is fundamentally shifting towards only top-down topics, but I'm going to do a few episodes, a bit of a sort of think tank, if you will, a think tank of one, kind of sort of two. I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. Just kind of exploring some of these more top-down ideas, because at the end of the day, my goal with the Optimistic Future podcast is to um, work to make some fundamental difference in the world at large. And I again, genuinely believe that by making small changes in our day-to-day lives, we can collectively have a huge impact. I also feel that by making shifts on more of a top-down level, we can also have a big impact, arguably a bigger impact. Now, of course, the top-down changes are harder, more time-consuming, more laborious. These are things that are going to ultimately relate to slash require, like, societal shifts. And so it's not something that I want this podcast to be as accessible to people as possible, where it's like, okay, these are simple changes that I can make. I can turn off the tap while I'm brushing my teeth. I can stop buying perfume and cologne and air fresheners and Febreze and different things like that, because they're just fundamentally bad for the environment and our health, like the health of us and those around us. Like, these are simple shifts that we can all make if we so choose. But on more of like the top-down level, it's a bit of a just space for me to kind of get some of these ideas out there. I'd love to hear feedback from folks who are listening to this. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider posting in the comment section below, or you can send me an email if you'd like. If you go to our optimisticfuturepodcast.com website, then there's a email form there, and I get all those emails and read them. So anyways, I'm curious to hear what other people are thinking about these topics. And yeah, I feel like there are some action steps that could be taken that will kind of come from some of these upcoming podcast episodes. I'm planning to do a few episodes around this, and then I'll get back to some of the more like, or maybe intersperse some of the more bottom up topics as well. So with that fairly lengthy preamble out of the way, I want to just talk a little bit more about talk a little bit about what I have been kind of doing behind the scenes around this subject matter, and yeah, just share some of those ideas. Kind of looking at this episode as being a little bit of a introduction to this top-down approach idea, and then in subsequent episodes, I will kind of break things down, or kind of take different topics sort of within this top-down framework, if you will, and kind of drill into some of those. So what I have, so again, I've been thinking about this subject matter for a number of years, and quite frankly, when I think about these topics, it's a little bit overwhelming. It's looking at starting with the question of, like, how can we make the world a better place? How can we make the world a place that is optimal for all people living in this world? It's a bit of a daunting task. There are, like, 8 billion of us, give or take, on the planet, and many cultures, many different preferences, et cetera, all these things. And so it's quite a daunting question. And one of the things that I've been I guess historically a bit dismayed about, but as I get older, not really as dismayed, because I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of pragmatism slash jadedness, that kind of seeps in over time. I was in my younger years, as I think about this, I have been thinking about these things probably since, it's probably been about 25 years now, actually, now that I think of it, because I remember thinking about this back in my teen years, and I'm in my early 40s now. So I remember thinking, like, it was quite frustrating. I was quite dismayed that there wasn't anyone on no politicians, no governments, no, big movers and shakers out there that I had come across anyways, that were talking about these types of sustainable solutions. I'm stereotyping here, but for the most part, it seems that, our politicians, our various leaders are looking at, like, we'll say politicians anyways, are kind of looking at their priorities of, like, well, what are we going to do over the next, 4 years of our term? And how can I get reelected? Those seem to be some of the driving principles. Now, I know there are exceptions out there. I feel from my experience, there are rare exceptions out there, but that seems to be sort of the confines within which kind of politicians are looking. And so to look at things like, really big picture, really long term, it just doesn't seem to be part of their purview to be doing that. I remember at one point going to a lecture at my old university, and I was, there was a political leader there, from a political party that I was really impressed with at the time, and like really liked a lot of what they were saying. And they were talking about like all of these different challenges, and I was like, wow, like this person's like outlining like all these different challenges. These are things that need to be worked on. And then at the end, this person said, and so these are the challenges, and I'm sure that someone's going to figure out some solutions, and we're just going to essentially like hopefully they'll figure out some solutions. But these are all the problems. Like, wow, like I can outline all the problems. I want to hear the solutions. I want to hear, what are some tangible steps moving forward. And so I was, quite disappointed because I, kind of had this person on a bit of a pedestal, my naive youth, and and then they just were like, yeah, here's all the problems, and I have no ideas for solutions whatsoever. It's like, wow, that's that was a bit disappointing. And so um, where I've been thinking about these issues but haven't come across anyone who's kind of proposed, there's obvious, of course, proposed solutions for a number of sort of like isolated, like for many, isolated issues that are out there. And of course, within each of those topics, there's division, there's polarity, and sometimes that's, political division, sometimes it's ideological division. So that's where it gets very challenging. But trying to wrap my head around, how to solve these, kind of global, sweeping issues around again, like, societal, economic, environmental challenges, others too. Those are just kind of the three categories I kind of um, uh, just to give a sense of like trying to be as sweeping as possible. There are, of course, other categories too. Um, it's quite challenging to wrap one's brain around. But so what I've been doing over the last couple of months is I've been taking some time and I have been working with AI to try to get some broader insight. So I've been using ChatGPT, I've been using Grok. Those are the two main ones I've been using. I find I get similar answers from both, to be honest. But I like to kind of, spread out my AI inquiries just to get different perspectives, so to speak. It's always weird to talk about like this, artificial intelligence or it's a large language model, things as, kind of personify them. But I guess that's just what we do as human beings. But trying to get different, quote unquote opinions from this technology, because the way I look at it is, one of the things that I think we humans bring to the table is the heart, the emotions, like the a lot of creativity, of course. There's so much that we have to offer that AI is, at least at this point in time, not able to offer. But then what AI can offer is just an infinitely more powerful data synthesizing, variable factoring in, huge asset to any task. Um, and so I've seen this, in my own, by profession, I'm a naturopathic doctor. I do a lot of research for new therapies that are coming out. I speak at different conferences, things like that. And like what's been really valuable to me is, asking AI to say like, okay, here's this topic. Like for example, right now I'm putting together a presentation and about something called mast cell activation syndrome. It's this issue where there's like way too much histamine release, like kind of that compound that's involved in allergies. And and I'm looking at research literature on like varying dosages of antihistamines and how that can be effective or maybe not. Is a higher dose better? And so in days gone by, it would have been like, okay, this is going to take like many, 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 many hours of like, sifting through PubMed, looking through these research, articles, et cetera. And like, doing my best with my search terms and all of that, looking at review articles, things like that. But like it would take a very, very long time. And while it still takes time, now what I can do is ask, ChatGPT, ask Grok, say like, okay, here's this topic, and I want you to do, a search of all the research literature that's ever been done, and give me like, an overall summary. And it can do that in like 30 seconds, sometimes less. Sometimes it's a minute if I ask it like a really detailed question, like with multiple, variables to take into account. And then it gives me this really nice summary overview. And I look at that and I say, oh, well, now, like based on this summary overview, then I can click on the little links that, to the different PubMed articles, to the different research articles, and then look through it. So I'm still, reading through the articles. It still certainly still takes a lot of time, but it's the point of me bringing that up is I can ask AI to take, like just do a colossal amount of work in a relatively very short period of time, and it's very, very useful. So I thought to myself, well, I'm using this for my clinical practice, for my teaching, teaching other colleagues kind of thing. So like, well, why not apply that to this question, so I just asked AI, ChatGPT the one day. It's like, so there's too much, income disparity in the world. Like, there's too much child poverty. How do we fix that? And just like threw that question out there. Just like, why not go big or go home and ask that question? Because anyways, for reasons I won't get into, because I don't want to go off on too many tangents. I have a charity on the side called Made Local Charity, and the main mandate of that Made Local Charity is to help end child poverty in Canada. So I'm Canadian, love to end child poverty worldwide, but starting with Canada, and then get that achieved, and we'll move on to other countries. Um, and so, kind of using that was one of the questions I asked, and I got a very, very elaborate answer back from ChatGPT, basically saying like, here's an outline of like steps that could be taken to end child poverty. And specifically in Canada. So I, again, it's obviously different ecosystems, different parts of the world. There's going to be different factors that are at play. So I was asking, like, how do we end child poverty in Canada? And it gave me this game plan of how to end child poverty in Canada. Now, with that, I then, so reading through it, there were certainly a number of details in there. Like, it wasn't just like a one-liner. It was a fairly lengthy reply, but the punchline was that the main answer, the main solution that ChatGPT had was to establish a universal basic income. And so when I hear universal basic income, then I start to think like, well, okay, so I know people have talked about that before, and but then I've heard that's a polarizing idea. Is that is that a sustainable solution? Is that a fair solution? Is that going to lead to more problems in some other ways? And I've heard that in some countries they have done pilot programs in some regions anyways where UBI, universal basic income, has been successful, but there are some concerns about that too. So then I, typed into the prompt like, well, what about like this or this concern? So, with universal basic income, like, because I said, well, is that really a sustainable solution? And so then AI came back saying, well, it is a sustainable solution. You just need to tax the rich more, and then that'll divert the wealth to the folks in poverty, and like it'll all work out. To which I then said, okay, because again, applying my human brain to this, and like kind of my experience with other human beings, and living on this earth for 40 plus years, it's like, well, it seems to me that the wealthiest seem to be very, very good at evading taxes. That's definitely the case in Canada, from what I understand, the case in the US. I'm sure it's the case in many other countries as well. So would that not just further erode the middle class? Would that, increase tax burden not just fall on, like say the 1% are sheltered, and then maybe like, the top 5 to 10% just below that top 1%, they get hit with that. So now the wealth gap divides even more. The 1% get even richer. Now there's just the 1% and nobody else, not even like a top, 5 or 6% below that 1%. And then like, is that really a sustainable solution? And is this going to work long term? And then furthermore, asking questions around, if someone's on universal basic income, is that really the best thing for them? Like, yes, like, I mean, if one is impoverished and can't, put food on the table, then, I dare say that the universal basic income would be very, very important. But then, is that going to help more than say like current programs that are in place, like, welfare program and food banks and different things like that? Is that really going to help more? And then furthermore, is a universal basic income going to um, lead to maybe other unforeseen changes, or maybe unforeseen issues or side effects, if you will, of that? So, for example, if someone is receiving universal basic income, they're not employed, they don't really have, maybe they don't have much to do in the run of a day. And, it's like, yeah, maybe at first, like, oh, great, like my needs are met, and, that's fine. But if don't really have like, work gives us a sense of fulfillment, it gives us a sense of purpose. And so if you're, I'm not going to bandy my words here too much, not meaning anything disparaging this way, but if one is just kind of receiving handouts all the time and they're not kind of, working for like kind of their money, then is that going to lead to a sense of like, lack of fulfillment? Is that going to lead to a sense of, reduced self-esteem? Is that going to lead to more maybe addictive behaviors and mental health issues and different things like that? And I just don't know. These are questions I'm asking AI. And so then, it comes back saying that, ChatGPT comes back saying that like, yes, that all could be an issue. And yes, like the wealthy are very good at dodging taxes. And yes, it could create more income disparity and this and this. So kind of like having this discussion around like, okay, so maybe the universal basic income isn't the best plan, or maybe it is. I'm not passing judgment on that. So then I asked AI, well, what would be a strategy towards a sustainable future for you know, again, just reduce using elimination of child poverty in Canada as the metric here. What would be a successful strategy that didn't involve any government involvement whatsoever? So, in other words, no universal basic income. Let's just pretend like the government's just taking care of our roads, keeping up the hospitals, all the infrastructure stuff, but they're not actually getting involved in. There's no UBI option. Let's say, just hypothetically. So then ChatGPT had a bunch of other ideas and was talking about different, benefits of setting up co-ops. So co-ops related to housing co-ops, for example, like, groups of people go in and, say buy an apartment building, or there's like kind of like a lease to own sort of like, apartment co-op type thing, or maybe other housing options that aren't apartment based, or food co-ops, or there was talking about like financial institute co-ops, kind of like credit union type things, type setups. And so started exploring that a little bit more. And so this is, one of the things that I'm planning to talk about in a future episode, kind of, again, as I alluded to earlier, kind of breaking it down into different subjects to say, okay, well, maybe have an episode about what is the viability of, more co-ops being set up. Because the idea there being that if one is involved in a co-op, and whether that's coupled with something like universal basic income or not, or maybe that's a strategy that might, it might be a strategy that allowed for the uh, maybe a co-op type strategy might make it improve things to the point where a society did not need a universal basic income, for example. Also factoring in things like the with as AI continues to develop, and it looks like we're really fast tracking on our way to like more like humanoid robotics and self-driving vehicles, self-driving delivery vehicles, that type of thing. Like it looks like society is likely going to shift quite a bit due to AI. It seems like that's sort of a runaway freight train, and just hearing me out here, part of me is just like, I kind of like it the old school way without AI and all these things, because there are a lot of really good things with that. At the same time, too, it's possible that AI might be a way that we can actually get rid of some of the, income disparity and other, sort of societal disparities that we have, because it's very easy for me as someone who has, thankfully, as much as, I came from a very poor upbringing, anyways, grew up in a household without much money, and definitely worked very hard to get where I am in the world. But it's despite all of that, easy for me to say right now, like, well, I like the way things are right now, but I also have disposable income and successful work life and three kids and a wife, and life is very good, albeit very very busy and not easy, but very good. But then there's of course many folks out there where they cannot say that life is as good. So it's easy for me to say let's keep it the way it is, but maybe moving ahead with AI and different things, maybe universal basic income, etc. Again, I don't know. I'm not passing judgment on that. Just throwing out ideas here. I'd like to live in a world where everybody can say life is good. Yes, there's going to be those rainy days. There's going to be some hardships, but if everyone has like a certain level of, income security, food security, I'd like to see an elimination of poverty across the board, especially child poverty, but, poverty across the board. I'd like to see optimal mental health, well-being for everyone, in the world, at large. So, uh, some of the future podcast topics will likely revolve around things like, okay, let's explore this co-op idea and see how something like that might work. See what's being done in the world right now with co-ops, and how maybe that's something that could potentially be expanded. I was chatting with a patient the other day, and he was saying how like he would just really love to be able to kind of get involved, like not like he'd like to get involved with, like, he'd really love there to be more like farm to table food options, like just from a health perspective, from kind of like an ethical perspective, from just like a philosophical perspective. He's like, I just have no sweet clue as to like how to make this happen. So I was telling him about community supported agriculture, like, CSA boxes, that type of thing. And so he's going to look into that, which is great. But like, if there's that sort of intrinsic desire of like, oh, I'd like to be involved with something agriculture wise. Maybe I'm not going to go start up my own farm, my own hobby farm, but I like to be involved in some way. Well, maybe there's some type of a co-op method where someone could, either financially invest in that with a lot of other people, or invest some time, or maybe go out and work on the farm for a few hours here or there, and like if there's some more of like a co-op type setup, like that could potentially be really helpful around food production, food security. um, Down the road, if we have more, if AI is taking over, or like able to do a bunch of jobs that humans were otherwise doing, and we just maybe a best case scenario is that AI steps in and then we find ourselves with more time on our hands, whether that's in like a universal basic income type scenario, or it's a more of a, okay, like you don't need to work 9 to 5 anymore. You don't need to work a 40-hour week. Maybe you can work a 15-hour week because AI is doing so much of the work for you. You have this extra time on your hands. Well, by golly, I can tell you, I worked on an organic farm for a summer between first and second year of my naturopathic schooling. So I worked on one for 4 months, and it was awesome. Like, just being out there in the sun, like my hands were like perma stained with dirt. I had, the best tan of my life. It was great. Like I loved it. I loved it. Now, that was not a sustainable future for me because getting paid like $8 an hour, I couldn't make that sustainable. It did not pay well, but I really, really loved it. It was wonderful in many ways. And so I've said to my wife many times, like, yeah, if I could just, get away with like working, maybe, 2 to 5 hours a week on a farm, like I would love to do that. So maybe there's some type of like a co-op setup where it's like, yeah, I would love to be involved in an agricultural co-op. And especially if, AI can take over some of my job and I had more free time to do that, if I didn't have so many patients wanting to work with me, then like I would love to do something like that. So there might, and then if someone's like, I hate that idea, like I'm not interested in agriculture at all, but I'd be interested in, some type of like a housing co-op where it's like, okay, I get involved with a multi-unit, like say like a chunk, a group of townhouses or an apartment building or something like that, and I'm part of that co-op, and like I like doing maintenance work, or I like doing accounting stuff. I like crunching numbers, so like I'm going to help with like the accounting part of it, or I'm going to do a bit of handy person plumbing or whatever. Like there could be some kind of role for that potentially. And then also one of the things I like about the whole co-op idea is that I really, really like, just intrinsically, I really like the idea of people, individuals being having more equity, and also, and maybe I'll define that. So what I mean by that is having more like financial equity, like more skin in the game, where it's like, okay, I have some accountability for this, but then I also have the benefit of this as well. Um, so if one is involved in a, say a housing co-op, then they're going to financially benefit from that, either by living as in that co-op, uh, and I'm not talking about like communal living or anything, nothing against communes, but just I'm living in one of those apartments in that in that apartment complex that I'm a co-owner with. So I'm going to be eventually I'll own my own apartment, so I don't have to keep paying rent to somebody else. I'm going to have that, and I have that as an asset. So then down the road, maybe I can sell that apartment or leave it in my inheritance, down the road or whatever it is. So and then also, but I'm also invested in like keeping that apartment like looking as good as possible because I live there, and then I'm also I'm a shareholder in it, so to speak. So like kind of having that equity, I think I really like that idea. I think that um, an improvement in distribution of wealth is a really great goal, because when I hear about just different companies owning the vast majority of like like certain like super corporations owning like all of these like big corporations underneath them, and certain companies owning like 30% of everything in the world or something, like I hear that and it just makes my skin crawl. Like it's just like, no, that's too much power, that is too much money for like one group or one individual or one group of individuals to have. Let's spread that out more. Um, but that's something where it's up to us as individuals, like what we want to, how we want things to look. If we say like, yeah, I'll just keep on, sending my money to like that, mega corporation, and like, sure, they can just have that money, then that's fine. If that's your choice, that's your choice. If you think to yourself like, well, yeah, I do like the idea of maybe not giving all of my money over here, and I'll have to maybe put a bit more of my own time or elbow grease like into this or that. But now like I have some I have some equity like in this or that initiative. Like I really like that idea. And if it's of course not going to be for everyone. There's no one size fits all out there, of course. But that's something I get excited about that idea of and so the co-ops are something that the idea resonates with me, but I need to learn more about it. So again, I'll likely have a dedicated co-op episode. Likely talk more about AI at some point. Maybe talk about the universal basic income a little bit more. So I'm gonna again plan to do a sort of a series of these topics. So I hope that it's of interest. And again, any comments or thoughts, I'd be very curious to hear what other people are thinking about this. If you know of other individuals who are talking about this type of stuff, these more like top-down ideas as I've kind of defined it here, please pass on their names or their websites or whatnot, because I'd either love to chat with them as guests on this podcast, or just look into their information, or look into what they're putting out there. Because again, there's been a few folks that I've come across over time where they've talked about different like kind of like societal shifts and things like that, but just nothing that's been I guess not like a practical kind of how-to guide. Anyways, any information you want to pass on, I'd be interested in taking a look. So, if you made it this far through the podcast episode, thank you for listening to my ramblings, my ranting here. Maybe no ranting, but ramblings anyways. I hope that this is of interest, and I will leave it there for now. Thank you for your attention, and please stay tuned for the next episode.